Hello, and welcome to the next episode of Void Talk. I'm your host, Rainstorm. Did you like the intro? I tried. I didn't try. I just came up with that literally that second. Anyway, welcome back to my show podcast thing. I know I wasn't here last week, even though I said this would probably be like a weekly thing, but that's not how depression works, guys. I just had a really low week. Just a lot of bad news, nothing good. And was not getting out of bed for a long time, and so things were. I just didn't have time. I don't really have time right now, but whatever. I'll do whatever. And I didn't really have a topic that I was like scrolling about like I did for the first episode, where I was just very. I had just been tracking that election. I'm sure I'll do more for elections because that's just like really good. Like I'll just sit there and scroll for like a long time. But yeah, I did finally get some good news that got me at least a little bit out of my funk. And the good news is they finally turned on the air conditioning in my building, so it's not a billion degrees in here. Yay! And now it's actually really nice inside, so I'm happy about that. And maybe I'll start getting slightly better sleep. So what we're gonna talk? What are we gonna talk about today? I think I'll probably title this like predicting the future or something. Because the thing I want to do, because I'm trying to like take steps to improve my mental health, and it might like and like do stuff that'll like be productive, even as things get more and more dire on the professional front. Um, I do I am a I think I mentioned maybe last time that I'm a book person. I'm a bookie, as they call us, the type of person who writes books. I've been working on a book for a long time, on and off, a long time. It's not a book, it's a series, but what's that series looks like has changed a lot over the past, I don't know how many years. I recently redid. I wrote an outline before my last kind of bout with depression, and I'm really happy with the outline. But I can't get myself to actually start putting the words on paper. I know, and I'm not blaming myself too much yet because the first line is always the hardest. The first page is always the hardest. But I just have not had any drive to start it. So I thought maybe if I talk a little bit about some of the work I've done, that might be it's both personal work and writing stuff, but also it's also going to be some political stuff because I wanted to talk about specifically the predicting the future because my story as it is set 50 years from now, 2074. um That was not intentional, like the exact 50, by the way. And I don't think I'll finish the book this year. I hope I do, but I mean, I'm looking at the time frame. It's not looking good. Um, but yeah, so it's set in the future, 50 years. It was, I originally picked the year 2074 a few years ago. Um, Probably intending to be done this year so that it would be 50 years, but I've rewritten it a couple of times. I've gotten several severe bouts of depression, layoff, you know. So it hasn't been a particularly great opportunity. But obviously, one of the parts of writing a book set in the future is you have to kind of come up with what that future looks like. And the political map was something that was important to me. Um, I mean, you'll notice that, like, I'm sure we'll see more of this going forward. That I'm sort of fascinated with international politics, and I follow global politics very closely. And this is sort of something that fed it. That helped feed that. I did a lot of research uh, to come up with um, a future that I thought was plausible. Um, I also mixed in just some like, so there's sort of my actual predictions, like based on like the information available. This is like the likely outcome. There's also some stuff that's in there that's like, well, this would be interesting. There's some stuff that I did for narrative reasons, but only if it made logical sense. Because I mean, I guess we can get into more breaking down the world and why I did, but let's at least look at the actual prediction. This is my map of 50 years in the future. This took me like months to make, so I hope you appreciate it. So this is a map of the world. Um, I want to note that Cambodia and Laos are two separate countries here. I just happen to have very few colors left. So this is not one country, but two. Because there's a lot of colors. So yeah. So this is, so I mean, if you're looking at this like at a glance, I mean, it is just a map of the world. There's some stuff that probably jumps out immediately, and some stuff that's a little more subtle. Uh, probably this looks, probably this. I would jump to this. My eyes would jump to this immediately. Whatever the fuck is going on here. Um, something happened here. Something happened in the Middle East. Some stuff is happening in America. I can zoom in on South America and we can pretend that everything is normal, because everything in South America is unchanged. At least border wise. Again, this is all borders, and like I have my issues with the way we define everything as being based on borders, right? I think that but I mean that's just the world we live in, right? Was we put a lot of value, we put more value on borders than we do on people. You know, the lines and we draw in the sand. So you'll see that there's some stuff that's so I did look up some prediction maps from like other people that they've done. Let's see, I can maybe Google some uh, future uh future world map maybe. Yeah, so here's like a good example of one. Oh boy. But yeah, this is like a good example. Somebody's a Romaboo. Um, right. Wow, the world map of the future. Yeah, you see all this. So this is like what you normally see with these future maps. I tried to put a little more work into it. Some stuff, yeah, there's some stuff where it's like, oh god, they got bigger. Which is so a lot of what I see in world maps is they tend to like combine a bunch of states into these gigantic empires. And that doesn't really make a lot of sense if you follow international politics. Like there's just not a lot of major state mergers, but there is some. So there's a lot of different things that have changed here that I've gone with. There is stuff where states have been conquered. There's stuff where states have fractured and broken up. There's stuff where states simply cease to exist. There's a number of states that just no longer exist. And that's mostly obviously there's obviously the big picks of there's a bunch of island nations that are very small islands and they'll sink from climate change in the next 20 30 years. And so the number of UN members that I came up with out of this, there are some unrecognized states still, but the number of UN members I came up with was 186. For context, there's 193 members currently. So the total number of members has decreased. So the decrease, but it's roughly the same, which I was surprised by that it ended up being very similar to the current number of states. There are fewer de facto states, though. The only de facto states I have listed here are Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Republic of Belarus. But um, Cuba, I don't know. I don't think Cuba would work. I think Cuba might. Again, I'll probably change this over time. This is not like a perfect thing. Cuba might not be stoppable because Cuba's already a state, so it would just be able to take its seat back. Maybe I don't know. I'd have to look into UN regulations and stuff like that. Because like even if its former parent state didn't recognize it and was a UN Security Council member. But anyway, so yeah, a lot of these are from state absorption. So a lot of the decrease is from state absorptions, state disappearances. There's like 7 states that just get eaten by ocean, or Australia in the case of which one is it? Is it Vanuatu? No, one of them. One of them made a deal with to sell its sovereignty to Australia. One of the Oceania island nations. But I don't really see. So I guess we can start with the easiest, which is South America. Is that I just don't really see a lot of border changes happening in South America. Like South America is generally pretty peaceful. Like yeah, there's insurgent groups and instability within individual states, but that doesn't tend to spread to the others. There's most of them don't really have like there is Bolivia and Chile fighting over the coastline, and obviously Venezuela and Guyana and Essequibo. But I honestly don't really see those going anywhere in the even in the medium term. I mean, I do see Venezuela invading Guyana as a totally reasonable possibility. I also don't see Brazil letting that happen. And yeah, I don't think Brazil would be okay with Venezuelan troops marching into a fellow sovereign state. So I don't really see this borders changing much. Obviously, the political situation is very different. We'll get into that a little more later. America's Quebec independence. I think this is honestly a coin flip in the future. I think there is going to be a resurgence of Quebec independence. I think it's not going to be dissimilar from the breakup of the UK. In that Quebec very clearly has a very specific culture. It's obviously francophone, also generally very progressive compared to the rest of Canada. And I can definitely see, and Canada, in my estimation, like just in general, feels like it's America, but like slightly better and 10 years behind. So, like in 10 years, Canada is going to have all the same problems the US has today. You also see the US has gained a little bit of Mexican territory, um, and as well as a Haiti. And that is a more political prediction. We'll get into that when we get to the Middle East. But needless to say, the US has expanded its control, but also has started to look more inward. And I guess I should probably do address the political situation now, because I think that that is going to make a lot of this make more sense. So, like a big theme of the book, I'm going to bring up Paint here. And yeah, I have the old Paint on Windows 10. Eat shit, guys. But so there's like so I wanted there to so it's the future, right? And the big theme of the story, I guess, is that humanity is at a crossroads. World War III kind of happened. It's not how you imagine World War III. It's not a post-apocalyptic book. I generally see World War III as sort of a decentralized affair, um, where it's just going to be a lot of simultaneous conflicts, and it'll probably only be recognized as World War III like 50 years later. But either way, the world is sort of divided. I brought up Paint because I feel like maybe this will help me like visualize for you guys my thought process, but humanity has kind of come to we're on the path, and we have been sitting at the crossroads for a long time. World War III, like World War I, is just sort of putting off the inevitable whole question, right? Of where does humanity go? We're at the cliff, right? We've come to the cliff, and this is the abyss. And I didn't complete the line segment. We've come to the abyss here, and humanity has to decide, where do we go? Do we go this way? Do we go this way? Hey, do we go back or do we go forward? Any of these directions could be good. Any of these could be bad, but I would say some of them are probably just bad. So the sort of four directions that I picked as the sort of four main paths of the world that the world can go, because I wanted to boil them down, and these are again super boiled down because even within these quote unquote factions, like there's immense amounts of disagreement, right? Like if two people who generally are part of the same direction could completely disagree on 99% of everything. So this is a very general overview. First would be the corporate path, right? This would be something like, this would be basically an ultra capitalist utopia sort of deal, right? Everything is commodified, people are commodified to the most degree, and we make the most profit. And the innovation that comes out of the immense amounts of profit being highly concentrated will save us all. Again, I'm not passing judgment on these ideas. I think that this is stupid personally, but my goal is to have reasonable, believable ideologies that are the main sort of directions that you see people saying, and this is definitely one of them. That the world will be saved by corporations and wealthy individuals who can have the money to innovate us out of all of our problems. Next is, I don't know what I would call this, I guess the nationalist path. It doesn't necessarily need to be like ultranationalism, although ultranationalism would fall under this path, but also like the European Union model would follow under this path, and that is decidedly not ultranationalist. But the point is that this is basically the current system. As it is, just reform the current system to be better. Reform the failings of the current system. Of course, what those failings are, what the reform should be, and how they should be implemented are all going to be highly contentious between anybody who sort of subscribes to this path. And there's also obviously like hybrid paths, like you could be in between these two, right? The third path is, of course, the what I would call maybe the revolution path. And that would be, the system is so broken that we need to tear it all down and start with something better and start something new. Obviously, IRL, I'm a little more partial to this path. I'm probably somewhere in between these two, but basically the idea is, we need to tear it all down and build something new. How we tear it all down? Do we do it via protest, violent revolution? Internal reform can be revolutionary, right? Like how we do that is obviously a massive debate, and what that world looks like, and what sort of future this looks like, because this could be a very, very different, right? What you think of when you say revolutionary might not be what other people think of, right? So it's definitely the most, I would say this one is the most chaotic path. And then the fifth path, or the fourth path, fifth path. Yeah, I'm an engineering major because I can count to three and then no further. And this is probably the least expected path, and I would call it the imperialist path. And this is basically a return to the old way of doing things. And I think there's been a lot of writing off of this. And I guess like if you want to say like this would be like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. Well, Elon Musk is also kind of here, and also kind of here. But like, these sorts of people who are like, well, if we just give corporations and billionaires infinite power, everything will be great. This could be a lot of different things. You could probably fit Viktor Orban in here, but you could also fit the EU in here. um, Multinational organizations like CARICOM or the East African Federation would all fall into this nationalist path, a reform of taking the current system and trying to make it better, trying to fix out all of its problems and make it workable, but maintaining essentially the same framework. And this is obviously going to include both your crazy nutcase far right, tear it all down, and our where we don't want any government types, but also, of course, the more notable and probably more relevant leftist revolutionaries, communism, anarchism. Uh, uh, what would be another thing? You know, big change, overwhelming change. You might have, you know, you know, big. So this is big change. Imperialism is not something. I feel like a lot of people write off the old way of doing things, bloodlines, where everything is based on your bloodline. You inherit power from the past and not from the people, because we live in a world where most places consider power to be inherited from the people, because the US and the Soviet Union won World War II. And that was ultimately the result, is that the US and the Soviet Union both derived their power generally from the people. And in the Soviets' case, of course, from the workers. In the US, it's from the people. However you phrase it, the idea that the world should be based on is that power should be derived from your bloodline or from God or from might, individual might. These are antiquated ideas. And the idea that, this paternalistic, imperialist, colonialist idea is definitely very outmoded. But I would argue it's not dead, not even by a little bit. I mean, look at France. France has very clearly wanted to go back to maintaining its empire. And there are states today that still derive power from blood. North Korea, Saudi Arabia being great examples. But these four paths kind of informed a lot about the future, and they're a huge part. And these paths are also just very, emotionally, they feel like they have unique emotional paths that I think a lot of people struggling at the crossroads right now, and who will probably be struggling even more in 50 years when nothing has changed, ultimately, where a lot has changed and yet nothing has changed, is that this choice needs to be made eventually. The gunboats are coming. They're what's his name, the admiral who opened up Japan, Perry. He's coming, and the gunboats are going to be here at some point, and we're going to have to choose one of these paths, something along the lines of these paths. Exactly what that path looks like, whether it's this way or this way or this way, it doesn't matter, right? Or super spirally this way, right? Like whatever it looks like, we got to pick one, we got to pick some direction. And yeah, I think emotionally, some people want to go in the past, they want to get rid of. And I mean, there's definitely overlap in many of these. Like these two definitely have a lot of overlap. The idea of ultranationalism, authoritarianism, the idea of the people maybe don't want to have responsibility for power. They don't want the power to come from them. They just want to be governed and let all of the power go away and let the power politics be left to those with power. Um, Many people want to take it into their own hands. They want to build their own future. Um, but also find themselves disagreeing on with everybody else, right? Some people want to just stay the course. You know, this system is salvageable. We can make it work. And then others want to hand it over to the next generation of of leaders, the people that our culture perceives as smart, even if they may not be. And that's where we get this. Right? And that's how I got in many ways to here. I guess let's start. I feel like I tried to I'm trying to go around, but I think let's start with the big changes. So let's take a look at Ukraine first, because that's a big one. That's obviously the politics, right? Modern, Ukraine war. To be clear, obviously, I am a big supporter of Ukrainian independence. But this map is not what it seems. This map would imply that the Russo-Ukrainian war ends with Ukraine losing Donetsk and Luhansk, but regaining Crimea and all of its other territories. And it actually, and I believe, grows a little bit in here. That is not what happens. In fact, the story here is that Ukraine actually lost the Russo-Ukrainian war. And that's because we actually have to start here. The Israel-Palestine situation is, I think, more dire than I think people give it credit for, because the US's unwillingness to stop Israel in any meaningful way or put up any roadblocks, even if that wouldn't stop Israel, is almost certainly going to lead to a regional war. And this was sort of the thing that was the chrysalis for this version of the map, is that Israel almost certainly is going to keep going until it forces Egypt's hand, at which point Israel will probably be fighting a war against Lebanon, Egypt, and a bunch of its other neighbors. This will probably, if this doesn't go well, it will likely prompt Israel to use nukes, which again the US would obviously back. But it would also, but the US backing that, of course, would end the nuclear taboo, allowing Russia to use nukes in Ukraine, China to use nukes on Taiwan. So again, I guess I should make this very clear. This is not the world I want to live in. This world is a prediction, not a wish list. My wish list would look very different from this, let me tell you what. But yeah, so Israel, obviously, as you can see, gained a lot of territory at the expense of Egypt. But this is a map of 2074. It doesn't reflect interim changes. But my point is that once the nuclear taboo is gone, you're going to see Russia nuke Ukraine. You're going to see China nuke Taipei. And then there's not going to really be any major response to that. So Ukraine loses the war because it doesn't want to get nuked. And that also means Moldova surrenders. And it also means an emboldened Russia just starts invading and fighting a war with NATO, especially once the next president of the United States, who I shall not name, I'll name him sometimes and I won't other times. Let me be inconsistent. I'm depressed. It's my excuse for everything. But he will likely either, I mean, yes, it's illegal, but El Jameo, laws are just pieces of paper, dude. He can actually just do whatever he wants. So he pulls out of NATO, and it's not good. So he drops from NATO, and then so Russia is going to then be pretty emboldened and start to fight with Europe. Ultimately, the fight goes well enough. Russia gets stopped pretty quickly in that war, but I believe I have the Russo-European war results. Russia and Serbia basically versus everybody else in the end. Where is the Russo-European War? There it is. Russia, Belarus, Serbia versus basically the EU, Georgia, Armenia, fluctuate their roles. But ultimately, the results are that nobody wants a French-Russian nuclear exchange. So Russia gains a bunch of territory in the Baltics, but the Europeans gained a bunch of territory in Ukraine, in Moldova, etc. Hungary gets kicked out of the EU because it sides with Russia as part of the war, stuff like that. Russia is forced to annex Belarus. Kosovo is forcibly recognized. Serbia and the Serb Republic merge. So stuff like that happens. So it's a pretty chaotic situation. But of course, what ultimately ends up with this is another Russian civil war. And that comes about when Putin dies, because Putin won't have a successor. And that leads to Russia kind of collapsing and everybody trying to get what they want. So Ukrainian partisans take back a lot of their territory. All of the potential separatist groups in Russia start fighting. There's not, if you've seen those maps of like people trying to carve up Russia based on the minority districts, that's not actually how it works, because a lot of those minority districts, the minority where they're not, the minority is actually like a tiny minority within their own oblast. But there is a few, and so creating some nice buffer states. This is the Bashkortostan Tartar Republic, the Tuvan Republic, which is a nice buffer state for China, because it has this really long border now with Russia. Not that this is like this is not a terrible border, because a lot of this is Siberia, so it's really fucking cold. But China gains all this territory because China really wants, and this is a modern thing, China actually does have designs on a lot of this territory, like IRL right now, because China wants access to the Arctic. And so a collapsing Russia would provide China a perfect opportunity to just take a bunch of it. And then you've got, I forget which sea this is. Errol, maybe. But you've got a sea. Now they've got a republic, so they've only really got this border, and like part of this probably to guard, instead of like this full frontier. So it actually shortens their border, because this is ice. But China gets its access to the Arctic. The collapse of North Korea happens. China and South Korea get part of it, because China obviously wants the buffer zone. China also, this is another thing, China invades Vietnam. This is a recent event in my history, and and it's important for a lot of stuff, is that China has just sort of fully embraced the imperialist route. But China, I would say, is, let's get my paint back. In this timeline, China has gone both the imperialist path, but it also increasingly is going the corporate path, because as the Chinese government is like dealing with the weakness of the Chinese economy and trying to like finance these massive expansions for various reasons, they keep they keep having to give more power to the ultra rich. You'll notice that Dubai, or rather the UAE, has expanded here. Saudi Arabia does not know how to manage its money. So that was a prediction I've seen a lot, and I agree with, is that basically the Saudis, Salman has no idea what he's doing, and they're just throwing money around and they're going to run out at some point. And that the UAE has been a lot smarter with how they manage their money and will ultimately just take over when Saudi Arabia collapses. Iran has obviously moved to the east here. Another thing I did specifically was also I referenced a lot of like historical states as well. This is a little more of a Khwarezmian Iran, which was centered, and more historical Iran in general was centered a little further east. Sometimes, obviously, sometimes Iran was like over here, sometimes Iran was over here. It's kind of shifted back and forth. In this case, it's sort of shifted eastward um, due to revolutions and instability. Uh, Iran has finally sort of stabilized, but now you see like Afghanistan is still, it's taken a lot of big chunk out of Afghanistan. Balochistan has freed itself from both Iran and Pakistan. Pakistan's a little snake now. There's another snake country. Yeah, Bosnia has also become a snake. And I'm not going to get into all the details, but yeah. Anything interesting going on over here? There's Bougainville, which is a country that's going to gain independence in 2027. That's like a real thing, actually. I don't know if they've been moving on that. I hope Papua New Guinea, fulfills its obligation there. They did make that a legal referendum, so um Africa. As you can see, Nigerian civil war happened. It's looking increasingly likely. I really hope it doesn't happen because it'll kill a lot of people, and I really hope the Nigerian people don't have to go through that. But it's looking likely. The tensions are just rising and rising. You can also see Ethiopia had the same problem. Uh, I threw my gauntlet down and said I actually have faith in the East African Federation happening. I think this is definitely like a gamble on my future prediction fight, my future site, but I think there's a good shot. I think that it's gonna be slow. I don't think it's gonna be as smooth. I think it's gonna take decades longer than they think it's gonna take. But I think there's genuine interest in for all of these countries to join. And I had it so that basically the countries only slowly join. So it starts out with only a handful of countries, and then other countries slowly join. I think I have the last country join literally in like 2073. So like a year before before the story starts. Look at my list. Um, no, uh, no, it's actually a little. It's 2062 is the last member joined. South Sudan, which is here, joins the East African Federation. This is an actual real proposed state, if you didn't know. There is some stuff that they've been working on it. The East African community exists. It would be, I think, beneficial. It would be a big economic powerhouse. I think it would help lift a lot of people out of poverty. So this is maybe a little wishful thinking. Um, Ethiopia, obviously, breaking up, but Somaliland gets recognized as an independent state. The African Union has already recommended that happen. They just haven't acted on it yet. Like they sent a mission to figure out whether they should or not, and they said they should. So I expect it to happen at some point. Once someone takes the first step, I think it'll honestly be good. I think it'll probably be good for Somalia, right? That's less territory you have to manage. It's just easier. Somalia is a big country. Like I mean, we look at the map and the map makes things look small, but like Somalia is big, and that is a hard and it's hard to manage a big country. So maybe this would make it easier. And hopefully, I do hope that the lives of people get better, right? Where else is big and notable? Oh, Mongolia got eaten by China.
China has claims on Mongolia and has for years, but historically, during the Qing Dynasty, Mongolia was conquered by China, and China, and an imperialist expansion is China, which we're seeing right now. It absolutely would consider taking that if it had the chance and was convenient. What else? Where else is something interesting to talk about? I guess we can talk about everything that's going on here. So the collapse of the Turkish government comes about only. I predicted it only comes about with Erdogan's death. I think that he's too strong. I think he's he's too secure in his power for the opposition to uproot him. But I also note just how strong the opposition is and how willing the opposition is to specifically work with the Kurds. So it's possible that they manage to work out a Turkish state that doesn't end up, uh, with a Kurdistan coming out of it. But I also think it's very possible that the Turkish opposition is just like, hey, we'll give you independence if you do independence and support the establishment of a Kurdish state if you help us get rid of this fucking guy. And then I also incorporated the Syrian opposition, controlled territories with Turkey, especially as Assad probably is not going to last forever, right? But of course, during the Turkish Civil War, Greece invades Cyprus, achieves Zenosis, commits a genocide. Basically, what you expect from Greece. I also had a big EU crisis, so the EU does not look the same. I probably should have gotten a map of just like the EU, but the EU has shifted significantly east. Let's take a look at the listed EU members. Germany, Poland, Czechia, Slovakia, Ukraine, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, and again, this is not consistent, right? Slovakia is probably going to leave the EU, and then it could come back later, right? And in several of these cases, that's what happened, right? Because I actually have Hungary in the EU. So Ukraine, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Iceland, Georgia, the Ottoman Republic, which is what this state is called. There's reasons for that. I'm not going to get into it because that actually does have stuff connected, like with Vietnam, that is actually connected directly to the actual story. Bulgaria, Romania, Montenegro, Kosovo, Albania, North Macedonia, although way later because of the recent election, they basically probably set themselves back 20 years. Croatia, Bosnia, Slovenia, Denmark, Scotland. This happened. This only just happened in the not only yeah, I say only just. We're pretending it's 2074, guys. Scotland only gets its independence in 2065. That's how long it takes for. But Great Britain is becoming much worse. Ireland gets its independence decades earlier. Where were we? Bosnia, Slovenia, Denmark, Scotland, Armenia, Hungary, Luxembourg, Portugal, Malta. And lastly, with the candidates being Ingushetia, Chechnya, Dagestan, Azerbaijan, and potential candidates being Kurdistan and the Republic of Belarus. The Republic of Belarus here is a revolutionary state, so it's like a bunch of insurgents carved out some territory as part of the former Belarus. They were unable to capture Minsk, but created an unrecognized de facto state. And the opposition force is a bunch of the states that left and have sort of embraced, again, no, that is the wrong thing, have embraced the imperialist path. And I've called that the Roman League. And that is Spain, France, which is the leader, Italy, Israel, again, the Roman Empire is a big circle, right? Israel, England, and Wales, I guess. The Serb Republic, with observer states being the Netherlands, Belgium, Austria, Lebanon, which is in this timeline control is an Israeli puppet state, and Morocco. So what else is interesting that's going on here? Is there anything else I wanted to highlight in my future predictions? You've got an independent Kurdistan. Azerbaijan has doubled in size, making it a lot more relevant. But I think that's most of the big ones. Most of the big changes, obviously, Iraq, Syria, Kuwait. What's left of Iraq and Syria and Kuwait joined together. They're Morocco conquers Western Sahara. So yeah, that's basically I think a good overview of my world in 2074. Um so in terms of, I guess, again, I want to reiterate this is not a wish list like by any means. I really don't want to see a lot of these things happen. But they are predictions based on predictions. And as you can see that there is this sort of the direction, right? The EU represents in aggregate that nationalist perspective. The Roman League, of course, representing the imperialist. You've got the United States, which fought a war with Mexico and took territory. It actually, in fact, conquered Mexico and Cuba in that war, and they fought a war for independence to free themselves. But the U.S. has sort of also had its imperialist phase, as did China, but both have now sort of calcified into a more corporate stance, focusing purely on internal profits. And the world and the rest of the world has sort of, and you've got and the revolutionaries don't really have a home. Africa, of course, is a growing power and is also going to have to make those same choices. A lot of these states are stabilizing after decades of war. You know, the colonialism in many ways salted the earth. So it's going to take a lot longer for things to start growing. Even 50 years from now, Africa is probably still not going to be struggling because of these dickheads. These dickheads right here, right in the center of your screen. But yeah. So I do see things improving for Africa. I just think it's going to be fits and starts, and I think they'll get there eventually. I believe the Middle East, again, it has the same problems. It's gonna have to. I think there's gonna be some wars. I think there's gonna be more wars. I think it's gonna suck. I think a lot of people are gonna die and suffer for ultimately not much. And I hope that things get better. Out of these, the Egyptian Republic, right? Like the Iranian Republic, these are now free democratic states. Egypt had to fight for its independence from Israel. Here, oh, Libya got split in half. I guess I didn't mention that. But then there's a lot of stuff that's going to be bad. So I wanted it to be predictions based on stuff that's happening right now, but also stuff that could happen, stuff that's based on history, and also stuff that's like just interesting because there's always going to be wild cards, right? Like this whole Ottoman Republic thing, right? I mentioned it, but like that's a total wild card. Like that's me throwing the wild card. But that's the thing about the future, right? Is that the future is going to have wild cards. There's going to be shit nobody can predict. And I think that's an important part of predicting the future, is recognizing that you can't predict everything. Predicting the future, and I'm sure I'll do more videos on predicting the future because I find it really fascinating. But the future, predicting the future is all about taking as much information as you can into yourself, as well as the vibes around that information, the general vibe, combining that with the general vibes and trying to like suss out the most likely direction. But also, like, you also have to, a big part of it is recognizing that you don't know what the hell the world is going to look like. What things are going to look like. There's always going to be wild cards. There's always going to be crazy shit that happens that nobody could have predicted. And that's okay. And that accounting for that is hard, but you also kind of can just not account for that in a way, if that makes sense. You know, you can just throw some wild cards in there and say, hey, maybe this will happen. You know, I didn't get into the like gritty details on how everything turned out this way, which is probably for the best, because then this would take way longer of a video. Um, and I need my voice. But also, like, I need to keep some stuff secret from my book. I don't want people stealing all my stuff. But I thought it would at least be interesting to talk about this, with the hope that maybe it excites me a little more about my universe and starting back on my book. I really want to get that started. I feel like I'll feel a lot better when I'm, making progress on that. Like, this is another wild card, like Quebec declaring independence. I think there's reasons to believe it, but also many not. Like, I could have predicted Texas, right? I could have gone for a lot of different things, and I chose to go for some and I chose not to go for others. China picking up, like, I feel like if North Korea collapses, it being split between South Korea and China is totally reasonable. South Korea has troops on the border. They would move in very quickly. um and as long as the North Koreans didn't release the gas and bombs, because they're in chaos, right? And I also think you'd see the Chinese move in very quickly, and both would try to seize as much territory as possible. China wants the resources, but also the buffer. They really don't want this border. And they certainly don't want this border, because this border is so heavily fortified that if they ever wanted to invade, it would be very difficult. And their ambitions on Siberia coming true so that they can improve their economy, right? China's gigantic now. But there's problem. Does not mean China, like, I know there's a lot of like cyberpunk, right, where it's like, oh, China or Japan is going to take over the world. I don't really see this as that. I don't see China as being infinitely more powerful. I see a lot of this as insecurity. We need to conquer more territory to prove how strong we are. And the cost ultimately of the Vietnam invasion is very high, for the Chinese. This costs them an immense amount, and it just it continues to weaken them. This is not represent an ultra power. This represents a declining superpower, desperate to maintain its position, not unlike Russia today and the US tomorrow. And also just that there's gonna be civil wars. There's gonna be stuff that happens that's not great. The Ethiopia and Nigeria have both been angling for a big civil war for quite some time. The signs are there. And I mean, Ethiopia just had a big civil war, and it's already gearing up for the next one. And it's obviously a human tragedy. But the depressing part about history is that this is just traditionally how states are made. They fight, they war, they have civil wars, they go war against each other, and eventually they settle on something that will be immediate, that will last for a little bit, and then they'll throw that out again. And in many ways, that was the selling point of the New World Order, right? The New World Order after World War II was the idea that states would just be fixed, and we're just going to settle things through negotiation, through the UN. Conquest is going to be illegal. And then Russia invaded Ukraine. Azerbaijan invaded Armenia, Israel invaded Palestine, and suddenly the age of conquest being off the table to solve international disputes is off the table. And I think that is going to that sets off the chain. And we are in a future, and I think this future is pretty conservative in terms of like it looks generally like our world. And I think ultimately, and I think this is something that I think a lot of people who predict the future, they come up with like, oh, we're gonna have all these crazy technologies, everything's gonna be like we're gonna flying cars. I always predict flying cars. We've been predicting flying cars for like 100 years, dude. But my point is that I don't think the future is going to look that much different than the present. But it is going, and in fact, I think in many ways these days that's a problem because things do need to look different. But maybe not necessarily on a map. And this is obviously a very Crusader King's way of looking at the world, just having a map. Um, because this doesn't, and I've mentioned a few times, this doesn't show the whole picture. Like if you look at this, like, oh, Ukraine won the war, but they didn't. They gained that territory after during the Russian Civil War, during the Europe, a war with Europe, and a war with, and then in the Russian Civil War, right? But yeah, I think I've mostly wrapped up. We can put this away. Um, I don't know if this was interesting. I hope it was interesting. Um, but because I just wanted to talk about my some of the work I've done, towards I haven't really gotten into like all of the detailed research I've done, but like I had a lot of fun coming up with this and I thought it was really interesting. And I learned about a lot of stuff. I did a lot of research on different countries. This has been a continuing project for years and is in fact the reason I can list the name of every single country off the top of my head. Um, but I think this was an interesting exercise. Um, I'm honestly like a little unconfident in uploading it because like I don't want to like give away trade secrets or whatever, but I don't know, maybe it'll start some interesting discussions if anybody actually watches. Which from the first episode doesn't seem to be like people are gonna watch, but that's okay. This is really just for me. I don't know if I really built up my hype enough because I didn't really talk a lot about my specific story, which this is very much just background lore for. Um, but maybe we'll see. Hopefully, I make some more progress. I make some progress, some progress on the actual writing of the book. I just need to come up with like a first line, and then I'm off, and hopefully it'll be published within the next year or so. Hopefully I can finish it before things get too bad because things are not looking good, and it's just more and more depressing. And I don't know how long this high of AC existing will keep me going for. But I guess that's it. I don't really have anything else to like go into, and I do have to go in a few minutes. Um, I know this is a little bit of a different episode. I think every episode is going to be very different. Um, there's other topics I want to talk about, um, but like coming up with a topic and then like wanting to talk about it at a moment is like very different. I think one of the topics that'll probably be coming up next is like third parties in the US. So a US politics episode. I know there's a lot of politics, and like I want to do things other than politics, but politics keeps like worming its way. It's like the one thing that I keep talking about, even though like I want to talk. I could also do an episode on like Age of Empires competitive play because that's really cool. I could do an episode on anime or something, but yeah, I should try to do stuff on like stuff like that, but I just need to do whatever I'm doom scrolling and thinking about. And right now, what I've been thinking about is trying to start my book. So hopefully this pushes me to do that a little more. But I have my outline. It's a very detailed 25-page outline. It's really, and I really like a lot of the changes I've made, and I'm so happy with where it's going. But I just gotta commit to putting it to paper, and then hopefully somebody will eventually buy it, and I'll be able to publish it, and then that would be really cool. I'm sure I'll talk more about it and more about my process and stuff. And there's definitely writing topics I'd love to share. So, yeah. Thanks for watching. That's going to be the end of this episode. I hope I hope you enjoy. Leave a like, comment, subscribe. Look, it just flashed rainbow. Yeah, I've seen that. I wonder if it does that for me or if that's like a feature. I don't know, for like rich people. But anyway, I hope you enjoy. I hope this was interesting, and I hope you'll tune in next time. And I hope I won't be doing another 2 week break next time. So anyway, bye.